Greetings, alchemists and somanauts. I've come up with a new name for us, somanauts. I've taken the word like astronaut, and the naut at the end of it means traveler or day tripper or voyager. And I feel like what we're doing is we're learning how to take these inner voyages into the body to learn and feel our anatomy and our sensations and just explore the outer realms of the universe and the inner realms of our own bodies. So the term somanaut. I've also heard it termed pulmonaut for those people who are really loving exploring the breath, are also called pulmonauts. So we are alchemists and somanauts together here today, and we're going to be exploring the pelvis. The other day, our first class, we felt on ourselves our own bony prominences and our own bony landmarks in our pelvis. And I know for me, as much as I love feeling everything, I also love having a picture. I love to know, what is it exactly I'm touching? It's that curious part of me that sometimes needs to know, but just wants to have a framework. And so I thought I would offer you a little bit more of a three-dimensional framework of the pelvis, as 3 dimensions is always more helpful than 2 dimensions. Now, if I was with you in person, it'd be even more dimensional. Maybe we'd be riding the 4th dimension. So here we are. We're going to start exploring our pelvis together. So I have a couple of pelvises. In addition to my own, I have one. But then I have this pelvis, which I've named Elvis, but I think I'm going to call her Elvisina. I'm needing a female pelvis at the moment. So you might have some other names. We could have a contest to see what is, in fact, what's the best name for a pelvis. Maybe it is Elvisina. So here's our pelvis here. And then I've got another pelvis for purposes of reference, just to see relationships. So our pelvis here at the very bottom, it's our sacrum here, and then these are our lumbar vertebrae down here, our thoracic vertebrae up into our neck and cervical vertebrae up to the crown of the head. But the pelvis has this amazing capacity, not on this skeleton because it's like fixed together with steel rods. So there's no movement here to show necessarily, but you can see this like S-curve of the spine, and the pelvis is at the very bottom. Also, actually, this is a really good viewpoint for a lot of times when we think of the pelvis, we think of it being like really vertical and upright, but the pelvis comes in at an angle and more so in women than men, purposefully to help with carrying the babies, but you can see that it also kind of creates a little bit of a shelf here based on just normal anatomy, which can be really helpful for our containing our female organs for those of us that are women. So this just is reference point of how the sacrum is related to the spine. All I know from my 30 years of experience is we have so much flexibility in the spine, and you can do the smallest movement down at your pelvis, which can translate all the way up to your crown, all the way up to your head. And that is usually the most interesting, subtle movement. And then we can have like this beautiful sort of sneaky movement. There's just so much incredible movement that can happen in the spine: rotation, flexion and extension, side bending. There's a lot of different things. We're not going to be covering that today, but I just wanted you to have a sense of how the pelvis is related to the spine. Which brings me back to the pelvis. We're going to start where we started together. And first I will just show you the general layout of the pelvis. We have your pubic bone in the front, your ilium on the side, your sacrum in the back, your little bitty coccyx at the very bottom, and then your ischium, these guys down here, at the very bottom. Keep in mind that when we're born, that the bones themselves, the pubic bone, the ilium, and the ischium, when we're born are not fused, and then in short order they become fused, except for the joints, sacroiliac joint on either side, your pubic symphysis in the front, your little bitty coccyx back here. So those are not fused. So we're going to go to the pubic bones first. We walked our little fingers down to the pubic bone, and we felt on either side with both of our hands, basically the right and left side of the pubic bone. In the center, we have what's called the pubic symphysis, which is a piece of cartilage that allows for movement and some flexibility. You know, cartilage is a little bit more malleable than bones, and then that's held together with ligaments and things like that. But it creates and allows for movement, which is super important for having a baby, and I'll show you why. Because when you have a baby, this area down here, this whole area here is called your pelvic outlet. And that needs to open a little bit, and you can see how that gaps kind of creates a shift in that pubic symphysis. And of course, this moves more than a normal one. This has like bungee cords. It's a bungee corded pelvis, and it opens to allow for the head of the baby to go through. So we have to have some flexibility in our structure to give birth. Otherwise, it would be fused together. And just everyday movement of like walking and doing things like that creates some movement in your pubic symphysis, as well as back here in your sacrum and your ilium. Around an axis here is how the pubic bone will very gently move, much less than what I'm showing you here. Your pubic bone has what's called the pubic ramus, and then down here becomes the ischial ramus. And then this is a foramen here called your obturator foramen. A foramen is basically a hole in the pelvis, and this is, I don't know, I have so many favorite spots, but this is one of my all-time favorite holes in the pelvis because it's lined on either side with these cool, very cool muscles. And then as we go underneath, we can appreciate down here, it's like this triangular shape, or diamond shape, from your pubic bone back to your ischial tuberosity, which is here. I'll point this out. This whole area here is your ischial tuberosity. And then we can come around and form the diamond. This whole area is your pelvic floor area here to your coccyx. So you have a right side and a left side of your ischial tuberosities. And I'm going to bring it up a little bit closer. It's a pretty big bone. So you can see there is the front part here, which I called the toes of the sit bone, and then back here you have the heels. So when you're actually sitting, you can be sitting too far forward, which causes a big arch in the back and is a lot of work, or you can be sitting really far back, and that's sort of super slouchy position, or you can be sitting right in the center, which is perfect because it allows your structure to support you, and you don't put a lot of extra forces through ligaments in the body and other structures like discs and muscles. So this is where we spend most of our time, theoretically we should be, sitting on the sit bones, and it's just a matter of finding where in space you feel like you're right in the center of your sit bones when you're sitting. We have your hip joint here, which is really circular and round, and you can see a little bit better in there. It houses something called the labrum, which gives a little bit more strength and surface area, although there's quite a bit of surface area here, for the head of the femur, which is this beautiful ball that fits right in there. And it allows for extreme mobility of the hips. So this is a very, very mobile joint. Not nearly as mobile as the shoulder, but still offers so much mobility. And so, the pelvis, when it moves, can move around the femur bone. Or if the femur is moving and you're lifting up your leg, the femur bone moves in the hip joint. So there's a lot of opportunity for movement. Then we came all the way around to the back side where you have your sacrum. And at the very bottom of your sacrum, so this is your sacrum here, it's a triangular shaped bone, and the heel of our hand was up here like this. And it fits the shape. I mean, it's kind of like, sort of an awkward position here. I'll do it from another point of view. Our hand is kind of like the palm of our hand. It fits the sacrum perfectly. It's rounded. You can't really see it here, how rounded it is, but it has a beautiful round shape to it. And at the very bottom, again, is your coccyx, which is your tailbone. There's a little bitty joint back here called your sacrococcygeal joint, and this allows for 30 degrees of flexion of your sacral joint. And a lot of people will fracture their sacrum, or it can get a little bit fixed and not have the movement, or sometimes the pelvic floor muscles can be so tight that it causes that tail to really curl under. We don't very often have this point of view, unless, well, I don't even want to talk about what would happen there, but we don't have the ability to wag our tails. But if we liberate our pelvic floor and free this up from the flexion, then you have much more space and freedom in the movement of your sacrum. These little holes here in your sacrum are called foramen, just like any hole is called a foramen. These holes here house the spinal nerves, which come down from the spinal cord and something called the cauda equina, which is like a beautiful tail, and this gathering of all of these nerves that come down right through this little canal. It's really cool. This little canal here, and then exits at the appropriate places, and then zips through these little holes to the front of the pelvis here, which then differentiates into your sciatic nerve or your femoral nerve or your obturator nerve, and innervates your legs and parts of your pelvis. It's really cool. The sacrum is basically a fusion of 5 vertebrae coming together. And then you have your SI joints on either side, where your ilium on either side come together and create, with this, what they call the sacroiliac joints, which are quite huge. And the ilium themselves, in Latin, also known as wing bones, the wings. You can see why, because they feel like, they look like, and they have this capacity to kind of spread and open a little bit. Again, this is more movement than what the pelvis would allow, but we do have the capacity to open this area and or close and sort of close the front and gap the back side. So there is, some really beautiful movement, albeit very small, that can make huge changes and shifts in the way the pelvis functions. So, let's see. There we are again. We can appreciate the underneath. There's that rotation in the coccyx. And then all the way back to the hip joints. And back to the front, which was this area here is called the anterior superior iliac spine. This point right here. And that's usually what we feel on the front of our hips. When we are feeling our hips and we talk about them, these are the points. And then you have the beautiful crest on either side of the pelvis, which is that space in between the ribs, and this is the top beautiful space of the pelvis. So, there we go. Here she is. Here he is. This is your pelvis in all of its beauty and glory. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to take you on this guided tour.